Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. I am Miki, Konno. This is Bethany, Fong. As you all know, Google takes the user very seriously. An essential part of that is gather and utilize user feedback. And what we're going to talk about today is how we do it. I've been UX researcher for the last 12 years and have a background in human factors and organizational psychology. Prior to Google, I worked at Sony, HP, and Microsoft. And I'm currently as a part of Android UX team, focusing on Android at Home project. Although my majority of work is around end consumer user, but I've been proactively involved in the Agile developer community, and I am very happy to be here.
I'm Bethany Fong, and I've been a designer for Android for about 2 years now. And my background is in engineering and product design through Stanford's design program. And I'm very excited to be here today to help you learn how to do research because it's one of my favorite parts of my job. I love talking to real users and seeing the unexpected things they do. And I love putting those observations into design improvements and ultimately into code. So today in 40 minutes, we're going to give you an overview of UX research from an Agile developer's perspective. And we'll walk through 4 case studies of different testing methods that we use in Android every day. By the end of the talk, you'll be ready to start running tests on your own products. So let's start with that overview of UX research from a developer's perspective. So why should developers care about UX testing? Well, Dr. Claire Marie Carat from IBM has performed quite a bit of research on return on usability investment, and she found that as a rule of thumb, for every $1 spent solving a problem in design, you save $10 in development, and you save $100 in post-release maintenance. And as developers, that should catch your interest, because that's your time and effort being saved due to UX research. And this is why we're doing this talk. We value efficiency and robust products, and we know that you guys do too. So what kind of usability improvements are you going to invest that dollar into? When you start looking into it, you might encounter a process like this, the long, slow Japanese tea ceremony. It's complicated and requires patience for everybody, and it takes almost 2 hours to make just 1 cup of tea, but it's worth it in the end. It's just not compatible with the need for speed. And here's the equivalent process in the research world. This is a traditional UX study schedule laid out end to end. And I do want to point out that this is not how Android runs design research today. This process takes between 5 to 6 weeks to run its full course, starting from the initial participant screener, creating the study, setting it up, running it, and then analyzing the results. And when you overlay a typical 2-week software development cycle over it, starting from the task selection and ending with a nice shippable increment, you see that these aren't compatible. For the same user task, you can start the research and the software development at the same week, but you'll be done with the development way before you even start talking to users. And you'll actually have a few increments done by the end of the testing phase. So here are some of the needs that we hear from developers when they encounter a timeline like that. We hear, can we get user feedback before we start coding? We need feedback on these brainstorm ideas now. Can't you get to the data analysis any quicker? And there's no time to test every user story that we want to build. So maybe what we're looking for is something more like the espresso shots of the UX research world, and less like Japanese tea. Espresso is still a lovely caffeinated beverage, but it's a lot quicker to make, and it packs a punch. Okay, so let's look at the landscape of how researchers measure users and see which area is espressoable. Here is UX research laid out on a 2x2 matrix. This axis from top to bottom is qualitative to quantitative, and this axis from left to right runs from people's goals and attitudes to people's behavior. And you probably recognize a lot of the different methods laid out on this grid, or have participated in one of these studies yourself. This upper right quadrant, the area pertaining to insights into what people do, is the one that works well for fast turnaround and quick feedback, and it's the most tactical. All the other quadrants are more strategic, though equally important. they do take more prep time and more time to analyze the results. This upper left quadrant is, you address this before you start building anything. It's more formative, and it helps with concept creation. This lower left is more about market research. It's more about existing habits and behaviors, and you have to gather a lot of people to get results. This lower right, we're getting closer to Agile, but it takes a lot of preparation and analysis. And although A/B testing can be fast, you don't get insights into why people do what they do. So we're going to focus on the most tactical methods from this graph in insights into what people do. So we're going to give you 4 examples of those tactical methods that we run in Android. Let's start with the heuristic evaluation. Heuristic evaluation is, in one word, measurement. It helps you gain insight into your product's performance against typical behavior. You're measuring against that upper right quadrant. It's a review of your product against a set of usability principles, such as the user should know what's happening in the system at all times, or there should be no extraneous information on the screen. Think about your own area of expertise. How would you look at your product from that single point of view? Maybe you're a security expert, or you're the person in charge of help tools, or you developed the design principles for your team. How could you measure an existing product against your own key principles? If you need some ideas, there are many lists of usability heuristics online. Just start with Wikipedia. And if you're here for Helen and Rachel's talk right before this, that's another great list that you could use. So here's the process for heuristic evaluation. And I'm going to be using an example from Android to illustrate this. A few months ago, another company released a tablet, and our leadership wanted to know how long their setup process took. And this was a great question to evaluate using a heuristic method because it was a quantitative question. Great questions can be, how long does this take? Or how many times might a user need to navigate away? Or something a little less quantitative, but still measurable, like how well does this flow adhere to principle X? So we set up some speed-based usability heuristics. Number of screens, number of clicks, number of times to enter text, minutes of loading time, confusing language that would slow somebody down. And then we set up a room and time to meet up with our key stakeholders, our researcher, our project manager, and our setup flow designer. We then ran through the setup process together at a measured pace, keeping track of time, but also taking detailed notes on each step of the process and how well all the elements on the screen helped us, the user, get through setup as quickly as possible. I can't tell you in too much detail what we found, but we were pleased to see that it was a standard setup process, and it also used some industry standard design niceties, like using loading time to educate the user on how to use the tablet. So we wrote a quick summary report with what was good and bad and how long the setup took. It actually took much longer than we expected, about 10 minutes longer. So what next? So normally action items when you're running against your own products are usability action items, like we have to move this button or we have to change this wording. But action items from running a heuristic evaluation as a competitive analysis usually have to do with keeping up with industry baselines. And this helps with scheduling our own work and saving our respective teams and our developers from churn. So to recap, what makes a heuristic evaluation unique is that it gives you evidence of adherence to principles. It requires one researcher, no users, and no lab, so it's pretty cheap and easy to conduct. Some things to keep in mind as you're considering it is that it doesn't put a real user in front of you. So even though it provides great baseline knowledge, it won't throw you those real-world curveballs. And it'll always be subjective based on which expert is running it. But it's a great place to get basic understanding of your own product and of your competitors' products.
Next, I'm going to talk about the RITE study. Rapid iterative testing and evaluation method, AKA RITE method. Some of you might be familiar with this terminology. This method is originally created by UX researcher in Game Studio at Microsoft. This is an iterative type of usability method and commonly used for the continuous design iteration on prototypes. Here's a common process for the RITE study. Starting with a research question from the team, such as, well, I really need to get quick feedback on this. And the UX researcher maybe put together the brief script and conduct a study. I mean, this portion is very similar to traditional usability studies. It's different because the interface changes of the prototype will be immediately available after each user. Therefore, this cycle repeats itself. Let's say you have 5 users coming to the study for 1 hour session each. So you will start with 1 hour between each session, for example, 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., between 1 hour as illustrated. In this case, changes to the interface are made immediately after the first user. Then interface is tested with the second user. This cycle continues until the very last 5 p.m. user. This method is frequently used for small design changes and UI tweaks or perhaps a design exploration. And it's great to use for the prototype and great way to make design improvements in a small increments. It's preferred to have a dedicated UX researcher to facilitate, and dedicated designer or even developer is needed to iterate the design. You could be one in 1 day as illustrated, or you can spread out to 2 days. So here is the 2-day RITE method example. For 2-day RITE method, first design iteration can be made after all 3 users perform on the first day, and tested with a new design with the 3 users on the second day. And then you make additional design changes after all users are finished. Let me give you some example from the Nexus 7 Quick Start Guide. I don't know if you're familiar with you, but to use Nexus 7 with mobile network data, you must first insert and activate micro SIM card. So when one of the tech writers approached me asking, well, Miki, I don't know this graphic is going to work because I really have a concern around the user will understand how to remove the SIM and orientation of the SIM card itself. So we basically decided to run 2-day RITE study. On the first day, we found several issues with the very first user. So user understood the orientation of the SIM card, but still they could not locate the exact location of the SIM card to using a pin to take it out. So user had some difficulty with it. And one second user did the same thing, we felt like we need to change the design quickly. While I'm conducting the third user, designer put together new design by next day. So second day, we used a new design to test it with the 3 users. This time, worked really, really well, much better than we expected. But again, any usability study, there's a new stuff comes up. At last, we made more design changes after the all study is completed and shared the result with the key stakeholders. Initially, they told me we have only 2 weeks to finish the design. By that time, we thought, no, it's not going to be possible. But by the time we're done, we feel like, wow, we really still made it work. So in summary, the RITE study focuses on changes on the design in an iterative manner. It requires 1 researcher or 1 designer, or perhaps developer, and 5 to 6 users. This type of study requires usability lab or conference room, and it takes a day or 2 to conduct. There are many pros of using this type of method. It's agile, and it's using real users. And it's a collaborative because team has to agree on each design solutions within allocated time. Remember, you have only 1 hour to come up with the solutions. Visual and very focused because design changes are instantly visible, and team is able to focusing on very focused design issue one at a time.
So our next method is the cafe study, which is a very popular study method at Google. And as you can tell from the picture, you get to talk to real people in a cafe study. It's a quick way to get real user feedback without needing a lab or pre-recruited participants. You use your device running a prototype in a cafe, and you politely ask people if they could give you their feedback on your product. And because you're asking real people with busy lives, you really have just a few minutes for 1 or 2 scenarios to test, like how would you share this picture with your friend? Or do you know where to go after setup is done? So a cafe study is useful to get fresh user eyes on small and isolated usability issues. And here's how we've used the cafe study method at Android. As you might know, we created the ability to put widgets on the lock screen with Jelly Bean 4.2. And when we were prototyping this, we experimented with different visual and animated ways of hinting that you could put a widget on the lock screen. And one of them was putting white hints on the side of the screen showing that you can swipe up or to the side to access your widgets. And this animation protruded a little bit into the unlock area. So we wanted to make sure that people could still unlock their phones without activating the widgets. And so this was a really good cafe study question because it was a very bounded use case. Can a user unlock their device successfully? So we then got set up with a very quick script of a few questions and several phones running the widget prototype with a few different lock screen patterns. A researcher and a note taker then went to our Google cafes to find some willing participants. And Google cafes, are great for us because Googlers are usually very excited to help. They have a lot of opinions, and they're familiar with usability studies. And if you're part of a large company, you will probably find equally excited participants among your employees. And if you don't have large herds of hungry coworkers to access, there's always the public. You can go to a real cafe or a farmer's market or a shopping mall and ask people there. So over a couple of hours, we ended up talking to 21 people with a total of about 90 lock screen attempts among them. And it was conclusive. No one accidentally triggered the widgets when they unlocked the phone, which is awesome. It's very rare you get that kind of really conclusive evidence. So we had found a hinting mechanism that didn't activate the wrong thing. However, a different problem arose, which is very few people actually noticed and asked what the white hinting was for the widgets. So when we went back to the prototyping team, we were able to tell them that taking up home screen space was fine, functionally, but we needed to keep working on discoverability for the next test. And that's actually what we did for our next usability test. So what makes a cafe study a unique method is that it's a quick way to assess those wishy-washy design changes that no one on your team really knows how to decide about, but just put it in front of a real user, and they will tell you very quickly which one you should go with. And it's easy to put together since you don't need a lab, and the report is quick to write because it's basically yes or no and common reasons why or why not. Remember that you should just test limited feature areas. And because you're getting a random sample of the population, you don't know about the user's background with your product or with similar products, so you're really just testing their behavior.
So next, we are going to talk about the pulse study. Reason why we call pulse study is because method is to assess the current health of the product. And it's also structured in the way that you can constantly monitor the health of the product. The pulse study uses continuous user feedback aligned with the sprint cadence. Therefore, it takes only 1 week from start to finish. It meets sprint teams' urgent needs, works well with user stories or small features. It's flexible to test any type of research questions, requires minimal advanced planning, and has immediate product impact. Here's what the process looks like. During the Monday Scrum, we decide what to test on a particular week as a team. Once we know what we're testing, we decide who to recruit. We are lucky to have a dedicated recruiter at Google because she understands the exact target users. On Tuesday and Wednesday, I decide what research method we use based on what we're testing, and I start creating a lightweight protocol or script. And then I walk through with the team, usually, and because they need to prep the design or prototypes. By the time Thursday and Friday comes, we expect the 6 users already recruited, and they come to the usability study. Sometimes we divide it into 3 users on Thursday and 3 users Friday, so that we can decide to use the right method, we can do that. Usually we spend 1 hour for each participant. It's a good length because you can really focus within the 1 hour time frame. Key finding with the send out after each daily briefing with the team, and then we then brainstorm solution for the issues, filing the bug, the new user stories, and so on. In summary, the post-study structure is fast and flexible. It can be used with many different types of research. It requires 1 researcher, couple of observers, and 5 to 6 users. In this type of study, it's good to use a usability lab or conference room, and takes weeks from start to finish. It works well with the sprint planning, mock-ups and demos, smaller and simpler features, and perhaps quick UI fixes. It complements full-scale research that requires more users, and which are typically long-term, complex, and strategic in nature. Now, I would like to go in a little bit more detail about how to run the post studies. First step is decide what you are really testing. Do you want to test some sprint build, what's so-called dog food at Google? Perhaps UX designer maybe have some mock-ups or prototype to show to the user. Or perhaps industrial designer wants to get some out-of-box solutions. Next, you need to decide who is your target user. In Android, especially with a brand new product, we often use internal people. But we also use external users to get more general insights in the usage and knowledge around the released product. Having a target profile will be really helpful because it's more coming up with more focused research questions, as well as you can help you to determine the relevancy of the result from the study. So now, who's doing what? You need to assign a team to different roles and responsibilities. Usually, I'll be the moderator because I'm a UX researcher, but other team members are either observers or note takers. At Google, research project is a team project. When I joined Google, Bethany immediately helped me out with setting up the lab, taking notes, observing and sharing key insights. I thought she was helping me because she's just nice, or I'm new, but it turns out it was a norm at the Google. It's invaluable to get teams' feedback before, during, and after the study. By the time you finish the study, everybody knows what happened and what kind of solution they may need it for the particular product. Now, you need to determine where you should perform the study at lab like this, or maybe conference room. This is the Android at-home lab. As you can see, this looks like a real second-story building. Home exists inside of our building. I must admit I'm very lucky to have a lab like this. Bethany and another researcher created this lab just for the Android at-home project. Some people are surprised when they come to the lab. This home lab is nice because it has an environment where users feel completely comfortable and truly feel home. There's a kitchen table, there's a couch, TV, and then there's also office and bedroom you don't see in the picture. We can use this space for multiple purposes, such as one-on-one usability sessions, group sessions, even for the team brainstorming in the home context. This is a wonderful space to get feedback on the mobile devices because it's more realistic than using office setup, as a typically usability labs look like. There's 3 cameras, and we can control from observation room. This is observation room upstairs. It hooked up with the AV equipment so that team can observe the sessions upstairs. And we could also communicate through walkie-talkies. There are many couches, so a number of people can sit down and relax and watch observation of the study. And there are whiteboards so that observer can write down some issues or perhaps doing some design solutions. Conference room is also right next to it. Therefore, team can attend a video conference without leaving the lab. Actually, you really don't need elaborate lab to gain user insights. All you need is a couple of conference rooms and the Google Hangouts. For example, there was one time our lab lost power. So it's completely shut down. So we have to scramble because 3 more users coming. So we immediately booked 2 conference rooms, one for conducting study, another one for observers. And then we used the Google Hangouts to continue the session. And it worked really well. So once you have everything set it up in place, you are ready to execute the study. So I'm sure some of you never done usability study before, but you don't have to worry about that. Your job to let users speak up and talk about your product honestly. You can follow simple guidelines to get maximum insight from users. Make them feel comfortable when they're coming in. How's your day? How's your traffic? Hey, thanks for helping us. Let them know problems are not their fault. Make sure to say something like, well, we're not testing you. Don't worry, we're testing the product. We need your honest feedback. And listen and observe carefully and repeat and clarify what the user said. What did you mean by that? Could you please clarify? Okay, you know the basics, but you still need to be very careful what not to do. For example, don't brag about your product, even though you really feel like it. I know this is your precious baby. You wanted to kind of advertise how awesome it is, your product. But that's opposite of the product usability studies. Don't say something like, isn't it awesome? This is a great product. And do not insult user, even you kind of feel like it. It's never good to say, seriously, dude, I can't believe you didn't know that. And it's always not good idea to make user undergo unnecessary suffering. Even though you're kind of fun to watch it, right? Such as, that's still wrong. You have to keep trying. You need to find that button. Well, for observers, it's nice to use the checkboxes. You don't need to take long notes because it's really cumbersome. And it's difficult to take notes and observing user at the same time. It's very fast to log. All you have to do is I have to list out so that you just do the checkbox. It's easier for observers attend a session without worried about, do I need to help Miki to take in long notes? So checkbox always helps for the observers. So next step is debriefing with the team. At Google, this is a very important part of the study because you get a lot out of it, such as describing action items and finding the bugs and so on. And this is genuine cross-functional collaboration. Maybe Bethany can comment on that from a designer's perspective.
Sure. So I just want to emphasize that getting your whole team together to have a cross-functional debrief is really important. Because when the researcher is telling you about key problems, you can start brainstorming ideas right there and addressing things like technical feasibility issues, product scope, new interactions you want to introduce, all in the same place. And so everybody leaves with an action item, and the problem gets solved right away instead of languishing in your email. And it's not just about problem solving, too. As the researcher points out successful features from the study, it's rewarding as a team to see all the things that worked well.
So the last step is communication. By the time the study is finished, teams should know what happened exactly. But an important part of the wrapping up the study is creating a report for us. Stakeholders need to know what happened and what changes should be made. And often having a report is very useful because you may not remember what happened 6 months from now. Once debriefing is done, I often send out a very brief summary of the result by email to the team. But sometimes I need to do the presentation for a wider audience because to address critical issues and highlight some of the problems by showing pictures and playing the video clips from the lab. Just communicating the result does not really guarantee the actual changes. And my job is not completely done yet at that point. So I often create a UX hot list as a reminder that I need to follow up these issues to make sure they will get resolved. Having an impact on the issues is much more important than just conducting the studies.
So I'm going to wrap this up. And we hear a few frequently asked questions. The first is, what if we don't have a user researcher? This is especially true for small development groups. Well, of course, it's great to have a user researcher on your team. And you can always hire a consultant for a short-term or a long-term project. And remember that there's still those 3 other quadrants that can be researched, if you remember that matrix from the beginning. And a trained professional will be probably best to handle those. But in a pinch, your product manager, a UX designer, or a savvy developer could run studies. I think now that you've heard our presentation, you have the basic pieces that you need to start. Another question that we hear is, what if we don't have the budget to recruit users? It sounds very expensive. Well, you can use your own employees, like we talked about in the cafe study. Just make sure that they aren't the ones who are working on your product. Or you can ask your customers through social media to participate. And small monetary rewards or gift cards always help and aren't that expensive.
Lastly, how do user studies complement acceptance testing? Acceptance testing is testing against the feature requirements in the sprint backlogs. But a usability study is for user requirements. For example, feature requirement might be A, B, and C. So, okay, after usability study sessions, we find everybody can do A, B, and C. But could be with lots of difficulty or dissatisfaction. Then what are you going to do? And maybe user desire D instead of A, B, and C. Then that could be a new feature, right? That is why usability studies complement and do not replace acceptance testing.
So we've laid out research methods that take from 1 to 2 hours to conduct, all the way to a week. And these are a great start. You don't need lab space or recruitment time for the Heuristic study or the cafe study. And you don't need weeks of a dedicated researcher for the quick change of the RITE study or the in-depth results of a pulse study. It's really easy to get started investing that $1 of design improvement. Your users' feedback is invaluable. And we hope that after today, you feel empowered to start testing right away and funneling those crucial insights right back into your products. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.